Hey, interior design lovers. Welcome to another episode of the Daniel House Book Club. I'm here with decorator Katie Ritter, who has been kind enough to join us and chat a little bit about her incredible sense of color. We are loosely discussing Joseph Albers' The Interaction of Color, though mostly we're talking about her work and what sort of helped define her sense of color. So welcome, Katie, and thanks for being here.
Thanks, Peter. This is fun.
And happy Martin Luther King Day.
That's right.
Okay, so my first question for you, and again, loosely based on Joseph Albers' book, has to do with additive mixture and subtractive mixture. And Joseph tells us that additive mixture is when you have projected light that's layering over one another. And subtractive is when you're mixing paints or pigments together. And this sort of brought me to something that I've heard you say before, particularly about the paint manufacturer Farrow and Ball. You said that they have more gray in their colors. Why is this important to you? And how do you use that in developing a color scheme?
Well, I think adding gray to paint makes it have more depth. And for instance, if you look at the Benjamin Moore fan deck, the classic colors, the colors are more muted, they're richer. They don't look, sometimes you look at a paint color and it looks chalky to you. You look at a yellow, it looks chalky, or a pink just doesn't have depth. But if you added a little gray to that pink, it would be livable. And so when Benjamin Moore came out with, I don't know what it's called, but it's 4 digits dash 2 digits, that fan deck, that color, those colors, and I do use them, they're much more vibrant and intense, and I find a little harder to work with when you're using a lot of color in a project.
In your own home, are you reliant on colors that have a lot of extra gray in them, or is it a very vibrant palette?
In my house, it is a vibrant palette, but some of that vibrancy comes from wallpaper. So I'm not relying completely on paint. And what makes it easier, I think, in my house in Millbrook is I painted the vestibule that is the one joiner between all the rooms around it, the kitchen, the living room, this little library that I'm sitting in now. And it's more like a dirty stone color. You know, it definitely has gray to it. You can kind of see it over there in that corner right there.
Sounds really romantic and beautiful the way you talk about it. Dirty
It's
stone.
a really pretty, yeah, it's a pretty color. And so it allows you to be a little looser with colors. You know, you can, I mean, this is an aubergine color, and I think aubergine is really pretty with that stone color. And then my living room is pink, but it's a pink wallpaper that isn't a flat pink. It's like a paper that has been rubbed, and so there's depth in the wallpaper. You can see through the pink to like a creaminess. It's by De Gournay, and they do a line of tea papers. It's very fragile is the only thing. So that is, you know, the pink and obviously the stone color look really pretty together. And then the floor in the front entry is purple. And purple looks good with stone. So it just allows you, if you have a neutral entryway, to the colors come off a little easier.
Okay, because you've jumped ahead to one question that I had for you, I'm going to go ahead and ask it now. Two of the books that we've previously covered in our conversations were The Decoration of Houses by Edith Wharton and Ogden Codman, and The House in Good Taste by Elsie de Wolfe. And both of them like strongly advocate that entry halls and hallways are very simply painted. usually in sort of a light color. And so I was curious if you were aware of that or had encountered that before, or if it's just been your intuition that it'd be simpler to have a simple color in the hall.
Peter, I would love to say that that I've learned all this and I've studied, but I really haven't. My decorating is really intuitive. And so that's interesting to hear, though.
Oh, you just picked it up naturally.
Yeah,
A
I
genius.
did. But no, but or the opposite, where you do a really intense front entry, and then everything off of it is a lighter palette. That
Yeah.
works too.
Do you have one direction that you prefer? Is one kind of easier, or doesn't matter as long as you're oscillating?
Um, it probably is easier to have the lighter palette in the front entry, like Edith Wharton said. I agree.
Interesting.
I agree with her.
Okay, so my next loosely Joseph Albers based question is, after he talks about color mixing, he discusses the idea of color boundaries. So color has spatial organization. Soft boundaries or edges of color area are produced by near colors and imply connectedness. Hard boundaries are produced by color that are further away from one another and imply separation or distance. Introducing a middle mixture between these two distant colors can flatten that distance. And this got me thinking about something that we see a lot in your work, where you'll use a wallpaper or fabric, but you don't want to run it directly into the ceiling. And it's bound usually by a molding, and that molding might be painted the same color as the ground of the paper. Why is this important for you to do, and why don't you like to just bump up to the white ceiling?
Well, it's like picture frames on a wall. It's nice to contain a picture with a frame around it. It's the same thing for paint colors or for wallpaper, to contain that wall. It also allows you to use a different color beyond that room, because then where do you stop it? It's not very elegant to stop on a corner with no molding. And so it's really just about containing the color in an elegant way.
Interesting. So sometimes your molding is painted like a very contrasty color to the wall color. So do you kind of, is there one mood you're trying to create when you do that versus when you do a room that's really like the one you're in now, that the whole envelope is one color?
Well, I usually paint the whole envelope when there's a lot going on in a room. If, a lot of the proportion of the wall changes from the wall color. Like, for instance, on this elevation, there's a big window. On this elevation, it's cabinetry. And so it just unifies the room, I think, and it allows, other things to sing in a room besides the architecture. It can look very broken up. I was looking at a designer's work yesterday on Instagram, and she painted all the paneling inside a vibrant pink, and then the outside was all white. And I don't know, it was just too jumpy. It was just too jumpy for me. So it really depends on the architecture, is the honest answer.
I think that's it. It's hard depending on where you work. Because I'm here in Portland, Oregon, and I get a lot of projects that they don't have any architecture to begin with. What happens if you don't have that? How are you creating those edges then?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's fun. A lot of houses on the second floor have sloped ceilings to accommodate windows. And so I think it's really fun just to run wallpaper up and over everything. It can be a stripe, it can be a non-directional pattern. And it also, gives you this envelope that is really interesting. And you don't have to worry about having the frame. You just run it everywhere. Up and over the ceiling. I was working on what do we call it? I have a client who, a rumpus room. I have a client who coined her like playroom a rumpus room. And so now that's what we call rooms like that. And I was working in Connecticut in a rumpus room. They had a pool table and, little basketball hoops and, all kinds of crazy things in this one room. And it had all the sloped ceilings. And so we just ran this vine wallpaper up and over everywhere. And it changed
Really cool.
directions, but it was interesting. It was nice and it was whimsical and it was okay because, it was in a rumpus room. It wasn't a serious room.
Does that take some persuading to get a client to say, yeah, put the wallpaper everywhere?
Yes, but I mean, I feel like I'm the age that I am, that I've been doing this for so long that I don't have the problems that maybe somebody your age does, where,
Yeah.
You've only been doing it for 10 years. I've been doing it for, I don't know how many years I've been doing it. A long time.
A long time, yeah, so no one's going to question you.
Yeah. Well, no, I definitely get questioned all the time, but I can get away with things that maybe a younger person can't.
That's a very nice place to be. So actually, one more thing on this idea of color creating space. You also tend to paint bookcases, the back of a bookcase, a different color. What leads to that decision? What does that do to a space?
I think it's just nice to embellish if you have, a beautifully proportioned bookcases and, if you're painting the whole room, one solid color, like a pale blue, and you have these nice proportioned bookcases to either paint the background like a watermelon color or put a wallpaper up there or a grass cloth or something different. And then it's layering. That's what it is. Then you've got the books on top of that. So it's just a nice layer.
Great. Okay, so you tend to work a lot in a classical or traditional setting, but your work often looks pretty contemporary, or at least, very current.
Thank you.
And I think that, the same rooms rendered in very near colors would look very sophisticated, but maybe a little boring. Would you say that your projects look contemporary primarily because of color, or what else would you attribute that to?
Sorry.
Well, and I wanted to add distant, particularly distant color. You aren't somebody who puts a bunch of beautiful soft hues together, and so I'm curious if you feel like that is the primary contributor to the contemporary feel.
I think the primary contributor to that is that I'm trying to design for people how they live today. And I always get, I have, like yesterday, I was with a client and he came over, he said, I have a cat, I have 2 dogs, I have a little child, I'm going to have mud on my shoes and I want comfort, but he also wants antiques. And he bought this big castle up on a mountain in upstate New York. And it's really cool. And he's inherited all these antiques and we're buying antiques at auction. But he still wants it to be comfortable for his 5-year-old daughter and her friends. And so I think comfort is an important piece to the puzzle of being contemporary. And then also, I think making a room interesting with, modern art and, and mixing things up and making them personal to the owner is also really important to me. Okay.
On the subject of like durability and a bunch of cats and dogs and stuff, how critical is it to you that every piece of fabric is like 200,000 double rubs? What do you say to a client who comes and needs that level of performance?
Yeah. Well, indoor outdoor fabric just isn't as comfortable. And when I'm working in my office, a lot of times the designers will choose a fabric that isn't, durable. And I just know, oh gosh, in a year, the client's going to email and say, I spilled something, what do I do? And so we try to be mindful of that, but I mean, there are fabrics that are really practical, like mohair is very practical and can hide, a lot of sins. And, um, I don't know. I mean, hopefully my furniture lasts long enough that when you're tired of the room you want to decorate in, 12 years, the fabric will have lasted, or 15 years, and it's time to change the room anyway. But, things happen and you live in these rooms, and I don't know, it's hard. I mean, I don't want to tell my clients, don't worry, because it's expensive. Decorating is so expensive.
Yeah, you do
And
have to worry somewhat, I guess.
yeah, no, and I want to be practical, and I want people to feel like they can, have their dogs and cats in the furniture. And I have a client who, it was a townhouse in Manhattan, and she had 3 dogs, 3 cats, 3 rabbits, but she refused to reprimand the dogs when they chewed through the furniture. Like this dog, it was a Irish wolfhound, and I had just upholstered a big banquette in orange leather, and I trapuntoed the back with embroidery of like botanicals. And the dog, the first day, loved the taste of leather and chewed a big hole in it.
Oh my
But she
God.
wanted the dogs to just, live there. And so we patched it and we patched it. And she just lived with a bigger and bigger patch of orange leather on her, because she wasn't going to do anything about it. She wasn't going to, put them in another room. She wasn't going to reprimand them.
Wow.
So that was
What,
an extreme.
what love.
Yes.
Not quite the same, but my mom, when I was a kid, bought a new leather couch for our rumpus room, if you will.
Uh-huh.
And within an hour of it being delivered, my brother had taken a black permanent marker and run from one end to the other. And 12 years later, it had pretty much worn off, but it was sort of just a trophy, I guess.
Well, good for her for just leaving it. I don't think
Yeah,
I could have done that. I think I would have freaked out and changed it right away.
fortunately, it was on the back side, so you
Yeah.
had to be a
Oh,
little
okay.
bit more observant than average to notice.
Well, my
Um,
oldest daughter, she had her friends over. We just moved into Millbrook like 2 weeks, and she spilled a Diet Coke on the dining room sisal. And sisal is so impractical because you can't get it up, and the Diet Coke stain is still there to this day. It's a huge. They must have gone to bed. It must have dropped on the floor, and they must have gone to bed because it's a huge stain. It's still there. So I'm living with that, and I'm sure every time she comes over, she sees that stain and thinks, "Oh gosh."
I'm not going to be invited home again. Um, well, that's funny because everyone says how practical sisal is,
Mm-mm.
but it
No,
really has some
it
drawback.
stains. Yeah, it does. It stains. It's inexpensive. So, well, it's still not, really expensive, but you can use it for a few years, and sometimes you have to change it. But our house is 10 years old, and I'm not going to change that sisal, for a long time.
Um, it adds some charm, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, so one more sort of technically question. Albers reminds us that the Impressionist painters never relied on, say, green produced by mixing yellow and blue, but rather presented blue and yellow paint strokes side by side and allowed the viewer's eye to perceive green. The mixing in the viewer's eye, rather than the actual pigment, is called the Bizold effect. When have you experienced a color looking completely different based on the adjacent colors? And Albers shows the example of red brick looking much, much darker when surrounded by black mortar than when surrounded by white mortar.
Yeah. I mean, well, we experience this every day. You go into, I was working on I have a new wallpaper coming out, and I have all the strike offs. So I was taping them up in my kitchen because the walls in there are off white. So I know that when I'm looking at the colors, like for instance, in my hallway, the wallpaper that you drew, Peter, the
Oh,
graffito,
uh-huh,
I know I can't hang it in there because I will read the colors against that blue color.
uh-huh, yeah.
So, and wherever you are, I realized I can't look at my wallpaper in my living room, because then it'll be I'll be looking at the color with pink. I mean, in everyday life, you experience that all the time. But wow, I can't imagine painting two colors next to each other, knowing that you're going to read turquoise when you put, green and blue. You'll see turquoise from standing in a distance. But I mean, it definitely is true. And light value has a huge thing to do. I mean, you didn't ask me that question, but light value is huge. You can't judge paint colors in your office. You have to go to the site because the light will be different.
Yeah.
You'll be at a west facing window instead of no light in my office. Kind of a situation.
Does the no light in your office create more work for you? Do you have to?
Yes.
I would think it would.
Yes.
When we did our first very small office here, I created a space that I thought I would work in most, and it was nice and white and had some bright windows, but we also had like a little storefront, so people would come in all the time, and I found that I could get absolutely nothing done. So
Right.
I ended up in this room that was painted the same color as the room I'm sitting in right now. So like,
I love that color. So
like yellow, yellow, yellow.
I
I don't
love it.
remember the name of this color, but let me tell you, it is blinding when you're trying to like do technical work.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I would find myself running out to the curb all the time.
Yeah. To get the natural light.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we painted this room this color and I really didn't like it. And then we
Mhm.
put this espresso beans color
Oh,
as the trim, and
so pretty.
suddenly it was way more
Yeah.
digestible for me.
I
Uh,
love it. Looks like a historical color. It's beautiful, Peter.
I'm embarrassed to say I think it's a bear color, and I don't remember what the name of it is, but
It's so pretty.
thank you. Um, so how has your color sense morphed over the years? And are there colors that you used all the time at one point that you wouldn't bring into a project anymore?
Well, when I first started out, when Peter and I first were married in 1988, we bought an apartment on the west side, and I painted all the hallways a deep grape. And I said, here's the paint color. I left, and I came back after work the next day, and they painted the whole thing grape. And it was just so awful. I can't tell you, it was so awful because I didn't understand what I was telling you about having a little gray in paint. It was just intense, and it was already a very dark hallway. There was no light in that hallway anyway. And then all the other rooms I painted white. And so there was that contrast too. If I had at least painted the walls, maybe a pale blue, or a pale lavender, or something that made the transition a little more gentle, it would have been easier on the eye. So I've learned to paint samples actually on the wall, or get a board on the wall. Don't just leave, say, okay, here's the great paint it, see you in 24 hours. I get samples made, I put them in the room where they're going to go, and really look at them in different lights of the day, so I can see what it's going to look like, so I don't make that mistake. So I'm just more methodical, I would say. I don't just choose a paint color in my office and say, okay, here's your color. I go to the apartment and I have, a few different colors, and really study the light.
Yeah. And do you do that for a project that is happening like on the other side of the country?
Then I have to go, and I'll give various paint samples. I had a project in California, and it was during the pandemic, and I gave the paint samples, and they were taking videos for me of the colors, and it all worked out. But it was different. Then when I finally went to install, it looked a little different than it did in the video. It's still really pretty.
Yeah.
But that kind of threw a whole wrench in everything. But yeah, you have to. I feel like you have to go and be in the space to see it. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Okay, so you have some beautiful products, and you mentioned wallpaper a minute ago, and I'm curious, how do you make the color selections on those? And have you done some strike-offs that you've absolutely hated? And have you ever like pulled a colorway because people aren't buying or specifying it?
Yeah, so when I noticed that when I was doing this house, I was looking for wallpaper for my bedroom, and all the ones I liked were discontinued because they're all kind of zany colors. So people don't go for the zany colors. And Holland and Sherry, who represents my fabric and wallpaper, the owner, Brian Dicker, said, blue is the most popular color and gray is also a popular color. So you should really, think in that range. And that is true. Like my best sellers are those kinds of colors, but I just can't help myself. I love all the, all the interesting colorways. So yesterday when I was, trying to narrow down the strike offs, I did maybe 15 strike offs, and there wasn't one that I liked. It's just so interesting how I'll choose colors. They'll be so pretty on a white piece of paper, but then when you have the paint sitting on top of that white paint on that white paper, it changes. Like the pink nothing is as intense. It's watered down for some reason. So I took, and it was a Sunday. So I cut up all the different elements that I liked. Like maybe I liked the flower from one, and the leaf from another, and the vase from another, and the dots from another. And I kind of combined them, and I took pictures and then sent them to the people who print my wallpaper, and I'll get a second round of strike offs. But it's very, it's very time consuming. It just takes a long, long time to get the right color. I don't know why. I can't figure out, I rarely ever get it right. Oh, there was one colorway that I loved. But it's all about how it interacts on the paper. And sometimes the paint color is a chocolate brown. Sometimes it's a pale blue. Sometimes it's a pink. Like all the pink ones were just hideous. So it's all, it just takes a long time. You just have to keep going, and it's expensive too. Yeah.
Yeah, those strike offs are not free, are they?
Nope.
Okay. Well, I'm glad to know that that you occasionally experience failure as well. That's encouraging.
All the time. All the time.
But that you've gotten one right in your years of creating. All right. So I'm curious, if a client came to you and said, I love your work, but I want an all-white room, what would you say to them? And could you do that?
I would say, yes, no problem. I can do that. And I had a client about 3 years ago, and it was a duplex. And she said, my husband really wants all white. And I thought, okay, great, I can do that. But I found that color kept creeping in little bits, just like a pillow or the cover of a bench. And eventually I was fired. So it didn't work out for me. So doing all white rooms is really, for me, is really hard because it's all about texture. It's getting all the right texture, making it interesting. I mean, yes, obviously the shapes of furniture have to be interesting and have to jive, but it's also about getting the textures right and making everything very, have a real hand to it, or a hand and then something very flat and something very fluffy. I don't know. It's hard. It's hard. I think it's hard.
Is there somebody who does work like that, who you like really admire? Are there rooms that are all white that you think, wow, that's beautiful?
I think, all the people like Victoria Hagen does all white. Vincent Wolf does all white. Who else does? Matthew Smythe does all white. They're all really talented.
So there are some great all white
Yeah.
rooms. One thing that
Yeah.
is kind of like difficult for me to conceive in that is that I think architecture sometimes is harder to read in all white. And so I like the bold colors because they really pronounce the envelope of the room.
That's interesting.
And
I never thought about that.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that might just be me, but that's, I think,
No, I think
why
that's right. I think
hard
that's
for me to
right.
imagine.
Yeah.
So did I already ask you, have you ever oh, so you said you installed a grape room, a grape hallway in your own apartment that you hated. Was
Ugh.
there any instance that you um selected a palette for some clients and they hated it, or you hated it
Um,
and decided it had to be redone?
yeah, well, the cover of my first book, I painted the walls a pale lavender, and they have an incredible art collection. And there's a lot of color in their apartment. And we worked on it for like a year and a half. It was a Peterpreneur project. And she walked in when we were installing and told me later that she burst into tears, because it was just like too much, just too much. But he loves it. I mean, it's still there and they love it, but it just, it takes some getting used to. And I kept saying, you have art, and instead of putting it against a white wall, it'll be so much more interesting if it's against a colored background,
Yeah,
I think.
yeah.
Um, I mean, I guess you could go the other way too, but for me, I love having art against, some little bit of color. I think it's really pretty.
Well, I think that art can look so much like an object on white and more like a piece of the room that you live in when
Yeah,
it's on
interesting.
color.
Yeah, I
Um,
agree with you, Peter. I agree.
um, okay, I've come upon the hallway question, which we already talked about, your dirty stone hallway. Um, let me see. Okay, do color trends play any role in your work?
Not at all. I don't
Yeah.
pay any attention. I think it's interesting. I'll see what the Pantone color is. I mean, it always pops up, on your phone or Instagram. And I always find that interesting to see, but no, it has absolutely no, I don't look at any trends.
And does a client come to you having considered trends, and do you have to sort of persuade them to stop thinking that way?
I know it's so funny. No, do you ever have people that do that?
Uh, I will say that in Portland, that love of gray has reigned for so long,
Yeah.
and people are finally starting to come away from it. But for a while, I really struggled to get people to want something other than that.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
it has died down, and I'm grateful for it because
Good.
there's nothing I like less than prison gray. Like,
Have you painted anybody else's living room yellow?
I have, I actually, so the time that I feel like well, I think I've failed with color two times. One time I painted this library on Mercer Island in Seattle.
Yeah.
Um, it's a Benmore color. I don't remember the name of it, but it looked like Alice in Wonderland when it was all installed. And it was, and the
Uh,
rest of the house is sort of lodgy. So this was really out of context,
yeah.
but they didn't want to change it.
Oh,
So
they didn't.
there is a bright mint colored library somewhere on Mercer Island that is horrible.
Well, I
Um,
think that was the color of the year a couple of years ago.
yeah,
So
I
you're
think,
probably right on point.
yeah, probably. Um, and then for a client who I've now gotten to work for three times, she loved this mustard color. And first we started painting, and it was like the first or second project I ever did on my own. First, we started painting all the walls this mustard color, and I could just hear the contractors talking about this stupid designer. And um, and so for a minute, I thought, stick to your guns. This is going to be great. And then I kept seeing it go on, and I'm like, oh gosh, that's awful.
Yeah.
But then uh, it's a yellow that has like a lot of umber undertone. And
Yeah.
we ended up putting all the trim in this umber, and there was a decent amount of trim.
Interesting. That sounds
Um,
nice.
it was
What color are
really
the
pretty.
walls?
And then we used sort of a sandy colored
Ooh.
grass cloth
Oh,
on the
so pretty.
walls. And it
That
was
sounds really nice, Peter.
beautiful. And they
Sounds
recently
beautiful.
moved, that was in a condominium, and they moved a few floors up in the same building. And they said, we want this color again. So
Yeah.
we brought that up and we added some more
I
colors,
love
blue
that. That
greens.
sounds
Yeah,
so interesting.
yeah, it turned out really pretty.
Yeah.
Um, those were my boldest color clients for sure.
Yeah.
Um,
That's
yeah.
fun.
Okay. Um, what else do I want to ask you while I have you here? Um, what do you think informed your eye? Where do you think you developed this sense?
Well, I always wanted to be a decorator since I was little growing up in California. My parents' house was very bright, a lot of wallpaper, a lot of color. My mother used a local decorator in Saratoga, California, where I grew up, that all of her friends used. And then working at House and Garden, I worked there for 4.5 years in the 80s and saw so many, the best decorators out there, so I got to firsthand see these rooms. And, all those decorators are really bold, like Mark Hampton and Jed Johnson. And, they just let it loose, I felt like. And so I think I felt like I was allowed to do it because I had seen, personality come through in decorating. So I think it was a combination. And then House Beautiful, I worked there for 2 years, and that we were doing projects on our own. Like we would get a decorator involved, like Mario Buada, and then he would say, okay, here's my vision. Then we'd have to make it happen, so it was behind the scenes, making decisions and getting everything made and installed. So I just had a great education. The
Yeah,
magazine business was, it just was invaluable for me.
I've heard you talk about that before. And one thing that I think I've heard you mention, I hope I didn't make it up, was that you worked with a photographer or somebody there who said, look in the camera and see the room upside down.
Oh,
Is
yeah.
that-
Yeah, Karen Radkai. So back in the 80s, before you were born, I worked at House and Garden, and they used what's it called? The Hasselblad camera, where you look through the lens, it's a square box, but everything's turned upside down.
Uh-huh.
When you look in, you look at, I remember Karen said, okay, Katie, and I was so shy back then. I was 21, and I'd be in, some incredible Fifth Avenue apartment. And she would say, she put a can of Coke on a mantle and said, okay, Katie, tell me what's wrong with this picture. And they had a black curtain that they put over your head like this, so the
Yeah.
camera was all dark, and I'd look in, I'd see it upside down. And so you'd really have to rely on your eye and composition. And
Yeah.
I couldn't find the Coke bottle because it was so disoriented, but you got used to it. And they did Polaroid. So then they would take a Polaroid and you'd see it the right way. But it was an interesting exercise in composition, seeing everything upside down.
So when you found the Coke bottle, what was wrong with the picture?
Well, that it was there in the picture.
Okay,
Like she
I see.
put it up there. So it was, all perfectly styled by Carolyn Solis, that decorating editor that I worked for at the time, with the flowers and all the beautiful porcelains and the big gilded mirror. And then this Coke bottle, Karen just stuck her, by mistake, somebody put a Coke bottle up there while they were styling and said,
I
okay,
see.
Katie, what's wrong with this? I'm ready to take the picture.
But
What's wrong with it?
yeah. Well, a Coke bottle might have added a certain coolness, I
Yeah.
suppose. Um,
Yeah.
does that experience um, carry into your work? I mean, thinking about the photograph, how does that inform how you're putting a space together?
Well, when I decorate, I think of elevations and like, how will that photograph? So because of that experience of working in the magazines where, everything is in its place, you're seeing it, you move it, the photographer will say, okay, move it up an inch, move it to the left. No, actually take it out. No, actually turn it 30 degrees. Like you're constantly fudging with this image. And
No,
and
actually bring in all new furniture.
yeah, that hasn't happened. So I've just trained my eye. They trained my eye for me, the magazines, of getting everything just right and figuring out interesting scale. Like you don't want everything
Yeah.
at 30 inches. You want the lamps to be up here, and you want, maybe a plant up here and a console table or, chest of drawers. So you want different heights to make it interesting.
Okay. I envy that kind of a more analog experience. I think that we younger people tend to lose out on that sort of really thoughtful, uh,
I know.
time consuming, but valuably time consuming process.
I
Do,
know. I agree.
do you think that um, young people are getting a good education for this profession? And that could be based on the camera discussion we just had. It could be based on an understanding of color. How do you think a young designer can best educate themselves?
Well, I think for me too, I feel like I want to see my contemporaries, what they're all doing. And you never get to see what everybody else is doing, except, on Instagram. So I think whenever there is a designer show house, I think that's really educational to see what you like, what you don't like. So many of them are just really bad because they're just trying too hard. The designer is just trying to throw everything in this one room, all these clever things, and sometimes it's too much. So I think it's good to go to designer show houses, and and then the design schools. I don't know. I mean, but beyond the technical, learning AutoCAD, which is of course so important, and um, but in terms of just your eye and educating your eye, I don't know, Peter. I don't know. That's really hard. I would say for me, I like going to show houses so I can just study what people are doing.
I think that's terrific advice. I love going to historic houses
Oh
too.
yeah.
I
Yes.
mean, I think sometimes that I meet students, myself included, who just are thinking in the classroom or in their office or whatever, and they don't go out and experience the 3D world. And I think that's like the most
Excellent advice.
critical. Um,
That's excellent advice. Yeah. That is really important to see that. Yeah.
do you have a favorite house to visit?
Um, Boy, there are so many in the Hudson Valley.
Yes,
I
you
went
are
to
in a lucky
Charleston.
spot.
Yeah, but I haven't been in a while. But I went to Charleston on a trip with the Decorators Club. I'm a member of this organization called the Decorators Club, and we saw all the historic houses in Charleston. Then we got to see some projects, like Gil Schaefer did a house. We had lunch in this Gil Schaefer house, which was so fun. So going to a place like Charleston was really educational. I don't really have a favorite that I tend to go to one and I don't return.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's hard to make a continuous pilgrimage when there's so many good places to go.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think we're coming to the end of our conversation. Is there anything that you feel I should have asked you about color, and any like parting words of wisdom you'd like to provide?
Oh, one other thing about just what we were talking about just a minute ago is auction houses. If people like here, there are so many auction houses, and you can see. I was looking through an auction just now at Stair Galleries, which is up here, which is kind of far for me to go to, but it's a sale from an apartment at the Dakota. And obviously they had an incredible designer. So you can see really good design by going to the auction houses and studying details and furniture.
Yeah.
I don't know what you have in Portland. What do you have in Portland?
Here, oh, you know, there's a ton of mediocre mid-century modern.
Uh,
It sounds like I hate Portland, and people who are close to me would concur with that. I don't think that that's fair. I think that Portland is geographically beautiful and does
yes.
have some incredible old houses that
Mhm,
are interesting.
mhm,
But we're pretty anemic on the antiques thing.
mhm.
That said, I did just last Friday get to go with the Northwest Society of Interior Designers to O Gallery, which is our sort of only auction house in the region. And I was a little worried because I was looking at the lots online and it looked like mostly guns. But we got there and there were some pretty pieces. There was a really beautiful Georgian break front, and
Mm.
there was some good lithographs. So I was more impressed than I thought that I would be. But yeah, we are a little light on the antiques in this region. The covered wagons did not carry them this far, is what I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah. I went to the Americana sale at Sotheby's on Friday, and there were a lot of guns and things like that. But what I always find kind of upsetting is I will look at something a lot online and I'll think, oh, this is, so big. And I'll get to the auction house and it's like, no, it's like this big.
Yeah,
It's not all what I thought it was based on, if I'm looking quickly, I'm not studying the dimensions. If I just look at the piece and, it's something totally different.
yeah.
So yeah, you have to be careful.
You do have to be so careful. You have to really read the the
Yeah,
dimensions, and sometimes I'll triple read and it'll still come and it'll be like, this is not really what I envisioned. But
I know it happens. It happens.
um, well, thanks for bringing up the antiques. I actually have one more question on that front. Do you notice, are antiques becoming more expensive than they were for a while, or are you continuing to find good deals?
Well, I don't know. I'll find out because I'm bidding on a whole bunch of things on the Americana sale for a few different clients and also the Stair Gallery auction. So I'll find out. But I was looking with Peter at the online at the auction, and he was saying, "Oh my gosh, this is just crazy. This beautiful, Georgian break front they're saying is going to go for $2,000 to $3,000. Whereas if we made it today, it would be, like
Insane.
$30,000, or I don't know how much it would be, but it's just such a shame that all these beautiful antiques are not there. People don't value them like you and I do.
Yeah. What's odd though is I think when they see them in a room, they do
Yes.
care about
Yes.
them.
Yeah, I
It,
agree.
it's just that they can't envision themselves caring about them on their own.
Yes, I agree, Peter. I know. Yeah, it's true.
Okay, actually, one final question on that because somebody just asked me. When you are bidding for a client, like what does that conversation look like in advance of the auction? Like you said, this is how high I'm going. These are
Yeah, I
the
only
items.
leave absentee bids, and so I usually bid higher than the high. Depends on what it is and what they're estimating. And I'm no expert in antiques, for sure. But I'll say I have one client I've worked with for a long, long time, and I used to, pretty much double the high end of the estimate. And he now is saying, oh, no, I don't want to do that. So it's give and take, so we talk about, what we think it'll go for, and just, loosely talk about, not loosely talk about price, we figure out a price, and then we do an absentee bid. But I only do absentee bids. I don't sit in on the auctions. I think that's dangerous. Well, I don't know, because a lot of times we'll lose something by $50 or $100. But the problem is you can't really say that because that other person who is bidding may have put a much higher estimate. A much higher absentee bid, and they would have kept going.
So you're saying it's dangerous because you may keep raising your
Yes.
cattle and it might get out of control really quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, well, thanks for that bit of knowledge. I will go off and encourage my designer friends to vote only as absentees. um, Thank you so much for your time, Katie. I really appreciate this.
Great
And
to see
it's
you.
good to see you too. And we'll talk again someday soon.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.